So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah and I work for the Jersey Biodiversity Centre as the Education and Outreach Officer. The talk I'm going to be giving you today is on ponds and amphibians in Jersey, and I'm also going to be including in that the Pondwatch Level 1 conservation survey that you can get involved with. So we're going to go kind of give an introduction to lots of different areas of ponds and amphibians. We're going to do what you need to do to join the conservation project Pondwatch Level 1. We'll do some species ID help for amphibians and freshwater invertebrates. We're also going to touch on the life cycle of amphibians and dragonflies. I'll give you some safety tips for conducting the Pondwatch Level 1 survey. We'll touch on biosecurity, that's if you're going to be visiting more than one pond. I'll give you some next steps for joining and how you can share the information that you find from doing pond dipping. And then I've got a list of resources that you can get to help your studies further. So Pondwatch Level 1, you need no experience or training. We just like to offer training for those who are new to surveying and new to conservation, but you don't need to do this, but it's great that you've all turned up today. You need to complete one survey between January and May, and I know that we're at the end of May now, but that's kind of, it's not a fixed survey period. You can still conduct this survey past May, and that data is still really useful information to get. You can complete more than one survey. You don't have to do just one. If you maybe want to do one at the start and one at the end, it's completely up to you, but we ask for a minimum of one. And you spend 30 minutes visually searching. You don't have to do any pond dipping. That is an optional extra. And you write down what you see by doing that visual search. If you can, and you are quick enough to take photos of what you've seen, this is especially helpful if you are not sure of the identification. Oops, sorry. And then to finish off, you complete your survey results. So ponds can come in a variety of shapes and sizes, but the element of the Pondwatch Level 1 is exactly the same, in that you walk around the edge of the pond and you're looking for amphibians. Now you can do this in the daytime, and you can also do this at nighttime, and you might find varying results of the numbers of amphibians that you spot. So although they do differ in size and depth, there are the same things going on under the surface for all ponds. And we can have a look at this by looking at the cross section. So the pond ecosystem, what we've got is it's split into different sections. So right at the bottom, there's very little oxygen, where we've got decaying leaves, and down here you've got decomposers and scavengers that are munching on all of the dead leaves that are sitting right at the bottom of the pond. The next section, which is in the middle, is called midwater. This is quite a large section of the pond, and it's also quite a dangerous area, because this is where you're going to be having fish, if you've got fish in your pond. Amphibians will be using this area, and so the predators patrol this zone, and it's kind of dangerous because that's where little animals are going to get eaten. Animals in this section, they breathe through gills, and then you've got one more section which is above that, which includes the pond surface. Animals that are using the pond surface, or just below the pond surface, they have the ability to breathe oxygen. There's plenty of light here. They are sometimes able to move between the pond surface and the kind of the grassland area as well. Other areas that are just as important as the pond itself are the pond margin, So this is the kind of border around the pond, and it provides kind of an extra habitat for animals that use both in the water and on land, such as our amphibians. So we've got 3 amphibian species in Jersey, and I'm going to start off with our newt species. We've only got 1 newt species, so if you find a newt, it is most likely to be a palmate newt, unless you are finding a lizard. And I'm going to show you kind of a comparison between newts and lizards, because when these palmate newts are out of the water on land, they look a lot like lizards. I've got some great photos to show you in a moment. So palmate newts, they are quite small. They're about 9 centimetres when they are fully grown. They are a mottled brown colour. They can vary in colour when they come out of the ponds. What you'll also see in males is they've got a ridge along their back, and their tail ends in this filament. And it can be quite hard to spot this, but it's a really thin kind of line right at the end of their tail. So if you're able to catch one and get a really close look at it, go straight for the tail, and that will be able to help you find out if it's a male or a female. We've also got on our male these dark webbed hind feet here. The eggs, if you have got vegetation in your pond, they lay their eggs on vegetation under the water, and the females fold their egg in between a leaf. Each leaf that's folded has 1 egg in it, and this egg is still attached to the plant vegetation. So you might be able to spot those if you look really closely at kind of the plants you've got in your pond. So during their terrestrial phase, this is what they look like, and this is why we get sometimes reports slightly confusing. Oh, just before, sorry, I forgot. This is what they look like in their tadpole stage. So when they hatch out of the egg, they are tiny, really, really small. The ones that I've found are only a couple of centimetres, and if they're freshly hatched, they're also see-through, and they've got gills on the outside of their bodies, which you might be able to spot. They do look a little bit like baby fish, but what you're kind of looking for as the tadpole develops is legs coming out, and then you definitely know that you've got newt larvae. Their gills, they get absorbed back into their bodies shortly after they've hatched out of the egg, which then gives them the ability to breathe oxygen, so they have to keep coming back to the surface. So newt or lizard. So when palmate newts are in their terrestrial phase, you might be able to find them under logs or kind of corrugated sheeting, or if you've left slate tiles out, they're going to be hiding underneath there to keep out of the sun. They like it damp and moist, so they're not going to be kind of sitting on top of these materials sunbathing. If you do see an animal sunbathing, it's most likely to be a lizard, and the lizard we've got here is our wall lizard. So if they're underneath logs, they are likely to be a newt, but if they're sitting on top in the sun, they're going to be lizards. So here are our palmate newt sightings for the last 5 years, and quite a sparse record collection that we have, and the hope of adding in newts to this conservation project is that the number of records will increase, and we have seen that this year. Even before lockdown, we were getting lots of records of palmate newts for the island, so it's fantastic to see that people are noticing these animals and sharing what they found. You can find them all over the island. You might be able to find them in your garden, but also lots of schools have them. I've been doing some pond dipping at school ponds and in looking around school grounds, and there seem to be quite a few around schools, especially if you leave really chunky logs that children sometimes sit on. Under those, I found lots of palmate newts. So if you see your location on this map and you know there's a palmate newt there, it'd be fantastic after this talk if you could add your sighting. Even historic sightings, so that's ones in the past, are still really relevant. So if you remember one from 3 years ago, you can still add it. So the next amphibian on our list is the Western common toad. We're looking for a brown, yellow, greyish skin, bumpy skin. Now, there's another name for the Western common toad, which is the spiny toad. And the reason that it's got this name is because of those warts. Some people, when they're writing about them, they say they are more like spikes than warts. I've never found one, though, that's got like really pointy warts, but that's another common name for them. They're also locally known as the crapo. What you're looking for is their eyes. They're reddy orange, and they've got a broad but blunt nose, and they've also got some poison glands behind each eye, which is a bufotoxin, which they use to deter predators such as birds, mammals, and some reptiles as well. Their tadpoles are jet black, and I've got an image of their life cycle to show you in a moment. The eggs, the females, they lay in strands, in double strands, and they are black. They're laid in long strands around vegetation. And if you're able to spot them when they're kind of fresh, they look like kind of strings of jelly. But over time, the algae will grow on those strings and it will be harder to spot them. So do kind of take your time looking around the vegetation in your pond, because you might overlook them and think that they're actually plants. During the breeding season, we get lots of photos like this of the females carrying around the males on their back. And the males have got this great adaptation for holding on and clinging on during the breeding season. So they've got these rough pads on their thumbs. That's the black part that you can see on the photo. And this allows them to cling on to that female, and they will cling on until that female has laid those eggs, which ensures that those eggs are his offspring. If he jumps off and lets the female carry on her day, it's likely another male will start breeding with her, and he wants those offspring to be his and not somebody else's. So he's clinging on, and we get lots of photos like this. Often you'll see one female with lots of males, and they try and wrestle each other off to get on top of the female. So here is the life cycle of Bufospinosis, or our Western common toad. The tadpoles, they are black. They have got a rounded tip at the end of their tail, and they can be quite small when they have hatched, and they grow very quickly. Their gills, when they hatch, they are, again, just like the newt, on the outside of their bodies, and then they shortly kind of absorb those gills, which means that they have to go up to the pond surface for air. If you're finding a toad baby, they're called toadlets. And these are our sightings. I have included in this the sightings for Bufo, which was the species that we thought we had on the island. But after genetic studies, it was discovered that we actually have the species Buffospinosus. So when we do data searches for toads in Jersey, we combine the two because of that name change. So again, if you spot your location on this map and you know you've had a toad sighting, even if it's a historical sighting, you can add it and we can fill lots of these gaps. The last species of amphibian in Jersey is the agile frog. And this is a species that not many people know we've got on our island. People generally know we've got toads, and sometimes people do know that we've got newts, but most people think that's it. But we do actually have a frog species. It's just a very rare frog species called the agile frog. It's light brown, and sometimes they can be a pinky colour. What you're looking for this species is that mask over their eye and then dark stripes on their hind legs. They are cream coloured underneath, and they are darker towards the back of their bodies. Their eggs, rather than laying them in strings like the toads, their eggs are in clumps, or their spawn is in kind of anchored to vegetation, submerged underwater, big balls like this. And their tadpoles, they are speckled along their belly, although it can be really tricky to distinguish between the two. You do have to get them in a tray to have a good look. So their life cycle is very similar to the toad. What you've got is they go from eggs to tadpoles with gills on the outside. Then their gills get absorbed, then they start to grow their legs, and then become froglets before they come out of the water. So the term for this life cycle is called metamorphism, and it is an amazing phenomena that happens in lots of different animals. But some interesting facts is that their tails, their tadpole tails, they don't drop off, they get reabsorbed back into their body. Their DNA throughout this whole process stays exactly the same. It doesn't change despite their appearance drastically changing. How they breathe changes from breathing with gills to breathing oxygen through the air. I'm going to also touch on some invertebrates as well, who have an interesting kind of life cycle in a moment. So our agile frog sightings for the last 4 years are restricted to a few sites because of an agricultural spill, which affected the pond quality, and the groups were already restricted, but this changed the pond quality, and unfortunately we lost quite a lot of agile frogs and ponds. So there is a big conservation project with lots of organisations in Jersey working hard to build new ponds, to mix different agile frog spawn, so we get genetic diversity between the ponds that are left. But these are the current sightings. With Pondwatch level 1 and the other levels, we've got an added kind of ability to mark not seen, which is a first for a conservation project that we've worked with, is that you write down what you have seen, but it's also recorded what you haven't seen. So if you've got a pond in this area and you don't see something, that's equally as important as if you have seen something. But I'll explain how to fill out the forms in a moment. So that's kind of Pondwatch level 1. You're just looking for amphibians and you're doing a visual search, but you can have an extra bit of fun by doing some pond dipping. You don't need any fancy equipment. You need a guide which you can get free, this one here, from the Jersey Amphibian and Reptile Group. You might also want an additional guide for freshwater invertebrates, and I recommend using the Field Studies Council one. It folds out and it's got loads of images of different invertebrates that you can find. You'll need a net and something to hold whatever you catch in it as well. And you can't forget, you definitely need a recording form to write down what you've found. So I'm just going to quickly whiz through some extras that you might be able to spot. And these are all invertebrates. So you will be able to spot on the pond surface water boatmen and beetles. You'll be able to spot beetles and also beetle larvae. So I've got a photo here. The head is the round kind of part of that larva. Its tail is there. It's got two little tails like this. You might be able to catch some nymphs of either mayfly, damselfly or dragonfly. They all look quite different, so there's different features that you're looking for to help you identify them. With damselfly nymphs, what we're looking for is a really kind of skinny, long body with 3 long tails. Mayfly nymphs, we're looking for 3 tails and some gills at the side of the body. Dragonfly nymphs, we're looking for short, stubby tails. And here is a comparison that you can get from a guide from the Jersey Amphibian and Reptile Group, and I've got the link there. With damselflies, you've got the 3 soft gills at the end, really skinny body, but dragonflies are kind of chunkier, and you've got the spiky short tails at the end of their bodies. Dragonflies, their life cycle is slightly different from kind of most invertebrates in that they don't change their body shape when they're nymphs. So what they do is they molt. When they hatch, they look the same as when they are kind of at the end of their nymph development. They just molt, which means they shed their skeleton, and underneath that is a bigger skeleton, which they then inflate, and that's how they grow. So you might be able to spot some that are really tiny, if you've got good eyesight, and some that are kind of a larger size. So when they are at the end of their nymph development, what they'll do is they'll crawl out onto reeds, and then they will molt one more time, but this molt is a different molt. This molt allows them to kind of have wings, and it is kind of what we recognise as a dragonfly or a damselfly. I've got a video to show you some other animals that you might be able to spot. So if you're looking at anything that's kind of sliding along the bottom of your tray, it's not moving too quickly, it just literally is sliding. These are flatworms, and there has recently been a study done in Guernsey of the species of flatworms they have on their island. It'll be interesting to see which ones we've got in Jersey. And you might be able to spot some leeches. Now, leeches, you can see that they have a sucker at the end, which they reach out and then they pull the rest of their body in. Along the pond bottom, what we're looking for are animals that are eating all the rotten vegetation that falls into ponds. So you'll find some freshwater hog louse, pond snails and some shrimp as well. To finish off with, just some tips about safety when working around ponds. So you need to assess the hazards to yourself and others, and this includes if you're maybe going to somewhere alone. Please make sure you tell somebody, a family member or a friend, where you're going, what time to expect you back, and you should always carry a mobile phone on you. It's especially important if you're going to a new site, and we always ask that you do your first visit during the daytime so that you can see all the hazards, especially because you'll be walking around the edge of the pond. So do consider kind of how quickly you're walking around, and that don't just focus on looking into the pond, do also check where you're walking and look for kind of trips, steep slopes. Consider the weather if you're going at night time and what appropriate clothing you'll need to be wearing, or if you're going on a day like this, sun cream and a sun hat. If you start your survey and you get halfway through and you feel unsafe, abandon the survey and head on home. It would also be great if you could tell us what made you feel unsafe, especially if you've been given or allocated a site by the survey coordinator. So regard all pond water as a possible source of disease. So when you've finished your survey, you need to wash your hands. If you've got any cuts, please either wear gloves or put a waterproof plaster on them before getting your hands in the water. Make sure you're wearing the right clothing and footwear for the day, so check the weather forecast. And yeah, if you want to wear gloves, especially if you have cuts on your hands, you can do that, or you can always just wash your hands after. We have got a few extra additional be safe little kind of bits of information. So please survey on your own pond if possible. And if you're surveying a friend or neighbour's pond, you need to practice physical distancing and only enter their garden and not their house. If you you don't have your own pond but you still want to be involved, you can let us know and we will send your request onto the survey coordinator, and you'll get allocated a pond that you'll be able to go visit to do this survey. If you're using pond dipping equipment, each household must have their own to use. And this survey has to be done during your allocated outdoor time. If you are part of one of the severely vulnerable groups, we strongly encourage you to stay at home. But if you really do want to get involved, we advise you to contact your GP to discuss this. The last kind of point that I want to talk about is biosecurity. This is especially important for invasive alien pond plants, which means that pond plants can transfer between different ponds if we are moving them. And how do we move them? We move them by not cleaning our equipment correctly. So if you have been doing pond dipping or you've been walking around the edge of the pond, what you need to do at the end of your survey is you need to wash everything. You need to wash your net, your tray, even your guides, because what can happen is they get plants can get stuck on your guides, and then you take it to another site and it could drop off into a pond that doesn't have that invasive plant. Also washing the bottom of your boots or your wellies before you move to another site. Making sure that you dry and you clean all of that equipment, not just with cold water, actually giving it a really good thorough wash with hot water if possible. And dry everything for as long as possible before you go to your next visit. So your next steps are to get involved. You can get loads more resources from the Jersey Amphibian and Reptile Group. There is a kind of a handbook for Pondwatch Level 1. There is the survey form. You can pick up your free identification sheet, where I've used a lot of the kind of the same information on here in my presentation. And there's also the one about dragonflies and damselflies. If you want to go onto the next step, there is also information about kind of how to join Pondwatch Level 2, and there's the handbook and some helpful PowerPoint's been put up there. So once you've surveyed your pond, you need to share your results, please, and you do that through our website, the Jersey Biodiversity Centre. We will be posting a video on how to submit your survey results. There's a special form in our activities page, but we'll do a video and post that on our social media for those who don't know about it already. It can be quite tricky to find, so we want to make it nice and easy. If you want to submit a casual record or one that you've remembered from last week or a few years ago, you can do that on our website. If you haven't got a pond, there's just a few things you can do to help amphibians. You can make a log pile, you can lift your fence if you're allowed to let amphibians move between ponds. If you do have a pond, please make sure there are no fish, and make sure that you've got gently sloping sides so that amphibians can get in and out safely without kind of having to do some mountaineering of steep slopes. So these are all the resources that you can get. If you want to get the freshwater name trail, it's from the Field Studies Council. And there's lots of information online about how to make your garden an amphibian-friendly one. And we can post these on our social media pages as well. Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions?